Hello everybody, what is up? What's going on? By the way, I'm Emily May and today I'm going to be discussing the case of David Louis Sneddon, an American university student who went missing at the age of 24 in 2004 in Yunnan province in China and is currently thought to be living in North Korea. This is a new series for my channel which I've been waiting forever to get into, and it is going to just discuss mysteries, true crime and other horrific events from history in East Asia. Today's case comes from modern day China and North Korea, and before I get into it I want to do just a little disclaimer. I mean absolutely no disrespect to any of the individual or groups of people who are discussed in this case. This piece is composed of information already available online, including articles from news sources and also from personal accounts of people who knew David. Whether these sources are credible or not is entirely up to you to decide, but they will all be linked down in the YouTube description box below. Also, as a general warning, this case discusses accidental death and kidnapping, so if you're sensitive to either of those things, viewer discretion is advised. This is the first case I have ever covered, so please be kind to me in the comments, and obviously in regards to the case and just for David's family and friends, please keep your comments all about that very respectful in the comments as well. Don't be like, oh, he shouldn't have done this, this shouldn't have happened. Not that you would anyway, because I think you're going to agree that he did nothing wrong. David Louis Sneddon, or Sneddon, I'm not actually sure how it's pronounced, but I've heard people say Sneddon, so I'm going to go with that. If it's wrong, I wholeheartedly apologise. David was born on the 3rd of May in 1980 in Nebraska to his parents Roy and Kathleen Sneddon. This is going to drive me crazy. He had 4 brothers and 6 sisters, and he was the youngest of all 11 children. Sorry, I'm going to use was. I'm going to talk about him in past tense, even though he probably is still alive because he disappeared 17 years ago, and when discussing his personality and the activities he enjoys and his hobbies and such, I feel like people change over time, and that was like 17 years ago, so he might be an entirely different person now. Anyways, he was an Eagle Scout, which is the highest ranking Boy Scout you can become in America. He was a skilled backpacker, he loved trekking, he was very much involved with sports and music, and especially in high school he was like a member of the choir. He got awards in cross country and he went backpacking with his family every year in Wind River mountain range in Wyoming. So as you can tell, he was a very active and ambitious young man. His family described him as being practical, considerate, spiritual, conscientious, self-motivated and accomplished, full of fun and zest and love for life. They said how much he loved Jesus, how much he loved Korea and the people there, how much he loved being outdoors, travelling, football, ice hockey, and his love for other cultures and things like that. He was someone who had a very strong work ethic. One of his former classmates at his university described him as being able to pick up languages very easily. He said that in their language classes together, he would just stand up and just speak almost like a native. He came from a very happy family. They were religious, very religious, and they were very big on family values and things like that, and they were just a very tight-knit family unit. David himself, he was very much a people's person. He believed that everybody can live a wonderful life through being ambitious, placing high importance on the family unit and being close to the people around them, loving others, living with a good moral compass, and being dedicated to your work. You can just kind of tell that he was a good person. He was ambitious, he was kind, he was loving, he was active, always open to trying new things. His parents were both professors at the University of Nebraska of Lincoln, I think it's called, UNL, but they retired to Utah after serving as missionaries in the Congo. And Utah was also where David went to college, or university as we call it here in the UK. And he began attending Brigham Young University, or BYU, at the age of 17, which I feel is really like a young age to be going to university. Don't people usually go at the age of 18? I'm not sure if that was right or not, but the source I found said that he went at the age of 17. And then he took like a 2-year, is it called a sabbatical? I don't know the terminology, but like a 2-year leave on which he worked as a missionary. He lived as a missionary in South Korea. BYU is a private university which is owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and 99% of their student body is made up of LDS members. And all of the students who attend BYU are, they're made to follow an honor code which is in line with LDS teachings, and that includes things like not engaging in homosexual relationships, no premarital sex, academic honesty, adherence to dress and grooming regulations, no consumption of illegal drugs, tobacco, alcohol, coffee and tea. And some of them I'm like, okay, yeah, I can get that, it's religious and everything, but coffee? No coffee at university? Seriously? How do these people even cope? I mean, obviously they were doing well because he was fluent in 2 languages, but that's not really the point, is it? How do you live at university without coffee? At BYU, David studied a degree in which he learned about business and Chinese language. I'm not sure if it was an Asian languages degree or if it was a business degree. I know there's kind of like both of them are out there and you can kind of study each alongside the other. So it makes it a little bit difficult to actually understand what it was that he was studying. I read one source said he was studying an Asian languages degree. Another source said he was studying a business degree with Asian languages alongside it. Which I know people do. People at my university did that. They studied like business and Chinese or business Chinese and Korean. Or I think I know one person who did business, Chinese, Korean and Japanese. I'm like, why would you torture yourself like that? So his major was in business and Chinese language and his minor was in Korean. And after he finished his first year at university, he went on a 2-year gap, like a 2-year leave, so that he could live in Seoul in South Korea as a missionary for the LDS Church. Some of his siblings were missionaries too. I think about 5 of them were. Michael, his brother, was a missionary in Stockholm in Sweden. James and Nathan went to Japan. His sister Catherine went to Switzerland. Cameron and John went to Germany, and Jenny went to Poland. So during these 2 years in South Korea, David learned to speak Korean fluently, and his Korean was so good that he ended up becoming like a teacher for the other missionaries to try and teach them a little bit of the language so that they could communicate well while they were there. Once he had finished his mission voluntary service in South Korea, he returned to America in order to do the 2nd year of his degree. But in the summer of 2003, he went back to South Korea to work for a company called Multilink, which is owned by his brother Michael. And they're a company which provide translation services for big multinational corporations. Companies like Procter & Gamble and Dell Computers. And he was doing some research kind of while he was there because he had further plans to study law and business once he had finished his bachelor's degree. And so he was preparing for his LSAT, which, if you don't know, I didn't, I had to look it up, is the law school administration test. Now, David had learnt Korean fluently and everything, but his major was in Chinese, and so he kind of wanted to spend a little bit of time in China to learn a little bit more of the language and to kind of get more points towards his graduation, which was supposed to be in 2005. And as we know from what I said earlier, he disappeared in the summer of 2004. He didn't get to graduate, sadly. So to accomplish all of this, he applied to a summer school program at a university in Nanjing in China. And that was kind of like a partnership program with his home university, I think, from what I've heard from one of his previous classmates. He has a video on the situation, I'll link it down below. But I am going to go more in depth into what his family actually carried out when they were there. I think he kind of went more into like David's personality and kind of the series of events that happened. So by all means go ahead and watch his video. I will have it linked down in the description box below. But anyways, David basically just applied to this program. And unfortunately, it was when the SARS virus was really big in China at the time. And so the trip unfortunately ended up getting cancelled. David decided he still wanted to go. He really wanted to, you know, go and accomplish something in China and broaden his language skills. So he applied to a program kind of off his own back in Beijing. So instead of going to study at Nanjing, he went to do a summer program at Beijing's University of International Relations. I'm guessing this was like a summer school type thing, like the one that I did when I was in Busan. You kind of go and you study like culture, you eat some good food, you study a language, you go on like day trips and things like that. It could have been like that, but I'm not certain. None of the sources I read really went into much information about what he was actually doing there. I just know that he was studying at this university. It's also kind of worth noting that he also taught Korean to a Chinese family whilst he was staying there, and he also played either hockey or ice hockey. while he was staying there. It's not really relevant, but hey, it's a fun fact. And from when he arrived here, all the way through his classes, he was always in contact with his family and friends, emailing back and forth, just generally keeping in contact and telling them all what a great time he was having and, you know, how he was looking forward to coming home and telling them all about it, essentially. Now, after his classes at the summer school in Beijing ended, David met up with his friend who he had known as a missionary when he was in South Korea. I don't really know how missionaries, like, work, like, what they actually do. I just know that they go and, like, teach about religion. But I don't know how they meet each other and stuff like that. I have like no knowledge on the situation. I'm sorry for my ignorance. But basically they were friends and they'd met while they were doing their missions in South Korea. I'm gonna get onto what his friend was actually doing in China at the time in just a little bit, because it is kind of integral to one of the theories, and believe me, it will blow your mind. It blew mine. I was like, I cannot believe. Anyway, so they decided to take a night train, and they got on this train. It's like a super long train journey. You sit on it for about 27 hours, and they went to see these beautiful mountains in Yunnan in China. And I think they're like well known for being in Star Wars or something. I'm not really sure, but they're beautiful. Now I kind of want to go and see them. And there are so many beautiful things that you can do in Yunnan, and apparently after they'd arrived there, David's friend wanted to go and do one thing, and David decided he was going to go and see Shangri-La, which is, well, it was originally a fictional place created by the British author James Hilton in his novel Lost Horizon, and it kind of talks about this earthly paradise, like this utopia, just like this otherworldly beautiful place. But anyways, this little city in Yunnan that was renamed Shangri-La just to try and encourage some tourism because of how beautiful it is, and it obviously worked. I mean, you can see he was planning on going there, right? So, and he was planning on just hiking up there, which is like the popular touristy thing to do. Like, you can go on like guided trails up to like the city at the top, or you can just hike up kind of your own accord. So he sets off trekking, and that is the last place anybody that he knew ever heard of him being, was when he left to go on this trek. But he was seen again after he'd set off, but that all comes a little bit later. Okay, just hold your horses, just wait up a little bit and we will get into it, because this is the point where he disappears, his official disappearance. Many people do believe that he is still alive, and I obviously will explain that theory in just a little bit. So on the August 15th, David was supposed to meet his brother in Seoul for more business work, and he just never showed up. The press release says it's the 25th, but I don't think it is. I think that's kind of wrong from what I read. Like, the dates just don't seem to add up if it was the 25th. Everywhere else says the 15th, so I'm gonna go with that. So he was meant to go and meet his brother, and he just never showed up. And his official date of disappearance is the 14th of August 2004. However, the last his parents heard from him was August the 11th, when he sent an email to his mum Kathleen. And I'm just going to read you a little part of this email. I'm in Lijiang now, in West Yunnan province. I will take a bus to hike Tiger Leaping Gorge in about half an hour. I'm having a great time here, but nonetheless I'm excited to come home. And he sent that before he set off to Shangri-La. So Chinese officials looked into it, and this is their official report, okay? He went on a hike and he slipped and fell and died. He just fell into the river and drowned, and they never found his body, and that was it. That's literally just what the Chinese government said. They were like, oh, he went on a hike, he tripped, he fell, he drowned. But there is absolutely no evidence to support this. There was no camera evidence, no eyewitnesses to see him fall. They never recovered a body or anything from the river. And they kind of just announced that and hoped that his family would be like, oh, okay, yeah, son's dead, whatever, fine. No family is gonna just be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what happened, we believe you, with absolutely zero evidence. And with no evidence paired with his background, like, he was an Eagle Scout, like I said before. He went hiking all the time like, his family knew this. They were like, that is not David. David would not just fall on a hike and drown and die. Like, me, if I were to go on a hike and the Chinese officials were to tell my mom, like, hey, she fell and died, it might be a little bit more believable, because I'm not an active person. I don't go on hikes. But David did, and, like, his family just were not gonna buy that. Like, how would he just fall and die, given all his prior experience in being active and hiking and going backpacking and things like that? Doesn't make sense, right? And another fun little thing that Chinese officials tried to say was that he might have gone into hiding if he hadn't come to harm in the gorge. And again, his parents just didn't believe that. He had already said, like, he was excited to come home. He was excited to finish his university studies. He had big plans for his life. He wasn't just like, oh my god, I don't know what to do, I'm just gonna run off in China. That didn't happen. Let me tell you, it didn't happen. I don't care what the Chinese officials say. I wholeheartedly believe, like, the same as what his family believe, essentially, that it just didn't happen. His family just did not believe this, and the Chinese officials clearly were not going to be of any help whatsoever. And so his family decided to go and do their own research there to try and look for him themselves and see what they could find out. And so his father, Roy, and his brothers, Michael and James, they went to China and they went to do their own little investigation over there. And the Chinese government, while they were there, they were like out with sniffer dogs, like, oh my god, look how hard we're trying to find him. It just felt like it was a bit of like they were putting it on to me, because you can't tell his family one thing and then when they're like, no, that didn't happen, they're just like, oh, I guess we'll look for him too then. What the hell, China? Do your research properly the first time and this won't happen. Having said that, could have been a cover-up. They did help to locate his backpack, which was good, I guess. He had left that down at a hostel before he set off on the trek, and it was one of those backpacks that has like a big part to it, and then it has like a little, like, you call them in America, you call them fanny packs. In England we call them bum bags. But aside from the terminology, the small bag, I'm going to refer to it as the small bag. Okay, just so we're not getting misconstrued here. I don't want to say bum bag for all you Americans, and quite honestly, I don't want to call it a fanny pack because I'm British and that just sounds very uncomfortable. So he took this small bag, and the small bag was gone, okay? The fanny pack, the bum bag, was not there. And from the contents of his rucksack, his family were able to establish what he had taken with him. He just took some shorts, a shirt or two, his toothbrush, the Book of Mormon, a little hat, his camera, just the things he would need for like a one night, potentially 2 night stay once he reached the end of the hike. And in his big backpack, the big rucksack that they still had, there was some film from his camera which was undeveloped, which, you know, back in the good old days you had to like put a new film in the camera and then take the old one out. So the old film, which had been like used, it had all his pictures on it, was still there and it was undeveloped. So they got this developed so that they had some pictures that they could kind of take with him to show people what he might have looked like at the time he disappeared, to see if anybody would recognize him then. I mean, he would look a bit different on a trek to, like, I guess a lot of the pictures that his family had of him, like in suits and things like that. It might just have helped them to recognize him more, especially if he was like wearing the same clothes. Like, that would have just been a bonus. And at the little guest house that his family was staying at, there was a Japanese guy, and this Japanese guy, James, as I said, he spoke perfect Japanese. He sat down, he had a conversation with him, and he helped him to learn so much about Tiger Leaping Gorge, like the gorge where he went missing. And he kind of talked about the different like options for travel and how tourists kind of generally get about there. He said that a lot of individuals who are solo travelers, they will kind of like meet up with other solo travelers, spend a little bit of time together, move on, meet another one, and they'll kind of like just exchange stories, share their languages, they'll eat together, they'll just generally chit chat and kind of make friends along the road like that, which is a really cute way of traveling if you ask me. I would probably never do it because I hate people. I'm just kidding. I'm just kind of introverted, so I probably wouldn't do that. But I think it was a really great way to travel, and it seems like it's a lot of fun. And that information from this Japanese guy was incredibly valuable because it really helped them to kind of piece together how David might have been traveling and kind of give them a look at what kind of routes he might have taken. Because he also mentioned that on this hike you would kind of walk for like a while, and then you would take a bus to this next area, and then you would walk a bit more there, and then you might like share a taxi or a car or something. He just helped them understand a lot about the way that this trek worked, because I think trekking is something like that they don't really do as much in America. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just what I saw from like the reports and stuff online, is that like you kind of go hiking, which is just all walking, but trekking is kind of like walk, transport, walk, sleep, walk, transport, walk, 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 sleep. So this really helped them to plan their journey, and the day after, the family really just set off on their hike into Tiger Leaping Gorge. And that is like a mountain. It's like on the side of a mountain, and there's a river down below. And when you look at pictures of it online, it looks incredibly steep. It looks like you could genuinely just fall and die. So you might be thinking, well, maybe that did happen. Like, how do you know it didn't? That's what this video's for, my loves. That's what this video's for. But obviously with his experience and the amount of roads up there where like the cars go along them and everything, it just didn't seem probable that he would have fallen. Okay, he could have in like some kind of tragic accident, but let's face it, no. Okay, like a car would have seen him. Cars go up and down there all the time. A car would have seen him. The other trekkers would have seen him, right? It's a popular trail. It's an easy hike. His family know that he probably wouldn't get injured to such an extent that he would fall and die. Like, it's just not probable. And on this hike, his family spoke with locals, and they reported that the only kind of injuries that you would sustain there, or that have been reported to have been sustained there, have just been scratches, bruises, the odd twisted ankle, just really, really minor things. And there's not even any reports of broken bones or anything, so how can this guy just like die there? You all know I don't believe this. And I think it's also important to note that this hike is not just like some backstreets thing that the locals take. It's not like, you know, off the road, kind of like out into the wilderness. It is like a proper tourist kind of trek that many people take. It's on the Lonely Planet website. It's probably in their travel guides. If you look at the Wonders of Yunnan website, it's on there. It's on TripAdvisor. Can you imagine going to TripAdvisor and be like, do not go here, 2-star review, beautiful views, fell and died. People don't die at these tourist destinations very often. Well, I mean, they do, but in this case, it just doesn't make sense. So given how touristy it is, and with all the roads and that, you would have thought that somebody would have been able to see it and say, yes, I saw him fall. I saw him fall, and he fell into the river and he died. But nobody did. There was absolutely zero reports and zero evidence to support this theory. But that's just what Chinese officials were running with. And I think there maybe is a very slim chance that that could happen, that he could have fallen and died without people seeing him. Maybe it was a quiet time on the hike and on the trails and things like that. But honestly, with his background that I mentioned earlier, being an Eagle Scout, being experienced in hiking, that just makes those chances even slimmer. Anyways, this is where it starts to get really interesting. So his family were really skeptical of what the officials were saying, quite rightly so. They'd gone there themselves, they were about to look into it, they'd set off on this hike, and they'd found out already that you just don't really get injured like that on this trail. And I also just want to quickly mention that David had a birthmark on the back of his head. It was like a patch that was a different colour to like the rest of his head, if that makes sense. I don't know if it like discoloured his hair, or if it was just like a noticeable birthmark that you could see through his hair. I don't really know, but it was quite a prominent feature. And also he had a widow's peak. One news article, it kind of made me chuckle. It said that he was prematurely balding. I was like, this man is 24 years old. He is like being kidnapped, or he is dead. Do not slander him like this. Like, that is just so rude. But I mean, he kind of did though. But he had like a widow's peak. And he spoke Chinese and Korean fluently. So this really, really made him stick out like a sore thumb. Also, he was in China and he was white. that's enough to make you stand out already. But with these other features, it made him like very unique, so that his family were able to say, have you seen the guy who looks like this? Have you seen the guy who looks like this? You know? So Roy, Michael and James set off on this hike with their tour guide, who was called Sean, and their translator, who does have a name, and I have forgotten that name, and I am sorry. As they're walking up this big trek, Sean spots one of his tour guide friends, and he's like, hey girl, how's it going? And the tour guide's like, it's going good, what are you doing? Are you like having a tour? We're having a good time. And he's like, oh, these people have lost their son, he has gone missing. And it's worth mentioning at this point that his family were wearing like little placard things, like these, like, I don't know what they call them, things that go over your head, a placard. And it had David's picture on them. And they stopped and they were chatting, and so this tour guide, who has no name, was like, is that him? And they were like, yeah, that's him. The guy that's gone missing, clearly, why would we be wearing it? They didn't say that, I'm just making this shit up. But essentially he was like, is that him? They were like, yeah. And he was like, I remember this guy. I think he came on my tour like a month ago. And the reason he stuck out to this tour guide was because David had kind of caught up with them, and he was just chatting with these people from Hong Kong, and they were switching between Chinese and English so that they could learn each other's languages. And that just really made it stand out, because this tour guide was like, wow, this guy speaks Chinese like perfectly. Wow. So he was like, yeah, I think he caught up with my tour group like a month ago. I know this guy. So his family continued on. They were like, well, if they know him here, he didn't die back there. How much further did he get? And they kept going, and finally they came to a place where they were just going to stop for the night. And there were like a little series of guest houses at this particular area, and they stayed in Tina's guest house. She's another one of the tour guides who owns a guest house on the thing. So they went to Tina's guest house, and there were absolutely no records of David being there, which sucked, but what can you do? But I go into this a little bit more later. We do find out why there was no records of him being in any of the guest houses. So at this point, it seems like something had happened between where the tour guide had seen him and when they reached the guest house. However, after they'd stayed there, they got up, they went to Sean's guest house for, I think it was like breakfast or lunch or something. Anyway, they went there to get something to eat, which was just a little bit further up the road from Tina's. And as they sit down to eat, the tour guide, you know, this guy that they've just spent like an entire day with trying to find their missing son, he's like, oh my god, girl, you know what? I remember this guy coming into my guest house and saying how beautiful this place was in Chinese. This white man just... I'm like, you could have told us this sooner, Sean. But Sean didn't. Also, I don't know why I'm making Sean camp. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing. But you know what, we'll forgive him for this. He is a busy man, he owns a guest house, he runs tours, and his staff kind of deal with the guests at the guest house. So it's really up to the staff as to whether they remember him or not. So Sean goes and gets his staff. He's like, hey girl, stop it. He's like, hey, hey girl, these people are missing their lovely son. Can you talk to them? They showed them the pictures that had been developed from his camera film that he had left in the other guest house at the end of the trail, the other end of the trail where he started. And they were like, oh my god, it was him. This is the guy who was here speaking in perfect Chinese. He was great at Chinese, wow. And they were like, but he didn't stay here. He arrived too late, and so he went to stay at Tina's. So we know that he did stay at Tina's. In fact, he did not die on the hike between where the previous tour guide had seen him and where the guest houses were located. He'd made it to the guest houses. Now, Sean's guest house is way out of the way of the gorge, which indicates that David wasn't planning on going down to the river. And that kind of makes it even less likely that he fell and died. Like, if you're near the river, sure, you might fall into it and die. But if you've gone all the way out of the gorge to this guest house and you've made it that far, how do you fall from there into a river down there? You know what I'm saying? So they determined that David was either traveling to Haba or Yoko. Haba is in the north and he would have to hike a little bit more to get there. Yoko, he would have to go south and get on a ferry to cross the river to get there. So at this point you're thinking, oh my god, it's a 50-50. Which way did he go? No worries. Sean is here to save the day. We love Sean. Sean saves the day. He's like, he did not take the ferry. No sir, no ma'am. No, there was no moms there. They were all sirs. It was his brothers and his dad. No sirs. So Sean tells them, like, there's two ferries. There's the new ferry and there's the old ferry, and the new ferry is the one that he would have had to take. And unfortunately, or fortunately in this case, it doesn't run between, like, I think it was like early August to late September. Anyways, it doesn't run over the course of the summer. In order to cross the ferry to go to Yoko, he would have had to travel like another 12 kilometers to the old ferry, and he wouldn't do that from the location that he was currently at. So his family were like, thanks Sean, you a G, you got this. Sean's like, okay, let's head off that way towards Haba. Let's see if they know him that way, because that is the most likely route he would have taken. And you might have thought, well, why would he not go and take the ferry to go to Yoko? Basically, that is kind of like a lonely route. There's not much to do there, and he would have to travel to a place called Lijiang. I think I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sorry, I don't speak a word of Chinese. However, if he goes up through Haba and like up that way towards like the Shangri-La main town kind of bit, he would have had way more cultural experiences. He would have met more people, and his family were like, well, he didn't have many days here. It would make so much more sense that he would want to go and have all of these wonderful experiences than go somewhere like really quiet, kind of by himself, and not experience as much. Sure, if he had more time he might have done that, but from what his parents sort of thought, from what his family thought, they were like, nah, it probably went that way, you know. And also in his big backpack, his family found flight tickets to travel from Kunming to Seoul on August the 15th. So they knew that he was definitely going to leave. He had the tickets already. He was planning on coming back to then just fly to Seoul, you know. So his family determined that he went that away and took the paths up to Haba, Samba, and Baishi Tai Terrace. I am so sorry, I probably just butchered that name. And up to the Tibetan town of Shangri-La, which is kind of like the huge hotspot for tourists kind of area. So they discussed that and said, okay, do you know what, we'll just hire a driver and go to Haba. So that's exactly what they did. This was en route to Shangri-La, which is kind of where he said he was going to go. But, you know, plans could have changed. He could have gone this way, he could have gone that way, whatever he felt like, you know. So they went up to Haba and they spent a lot of time talking with local people there, and so many people were like really worried about their situation. They took a lot of interest in it. They were trying to be as helpful as they possibly could. And after spending a little bit of time there with not a huge amount of luck, they decided to hire another car and go up to Shangri-La. They were just kind of thinking, okay, well, we'll go a little bit further, see if anybody else knows him. And as they were loading up the car, this shopkeeper comes up to them because he sees the tabards that they were wearing. And as they were loading up the car to travel up to Shangri-La, the shopkeeper comes up to them because he saw the tabards that they were wearing. And the tabard said missing trekker on it in Chinese. And his family hadn't spoken to this shopkeeper yet. They were just about to get in the car, and this shopkeeper was like, oh, hold on, I think I remember this guy. Was he here like a month ago? And they were like, yeah, he was here like a month ago. And he was like, I think he came into my shop to buy some biscuits. He said that David had been traveling with like a small Chinese woman at the time. And the shopkeeper pointed to Michael, David's brother, and he was like, he kind of looked like this guy. Like, he had a similar like size and like body shape, kind of like height to Michael, and that was true. So they pulled out the pictures from the undeveloped film, remember, that they found in his bag, and they showed the shopkeeper, and the shopkeeper looked at them and he was like, yeah, that's him. He definitely came in my shop. I remember him because he spoke Chinese so well. Like, that is such a good thing to have, because it just really makes you stick out, I feel, in other countries. So if you're traveling and don't want to get kidnapped or murdered or whatever, like, just speak their language really well. Top tip for survival. So they thanked the shopkeeper, they got in the car, and they drove along to the next stop, which was Baishi Tai Terrace. Sorry for butchering the name, but that's where they went. So they got there, and then they spent another night in a guest house. I think it was called like Nashi Garden Culture Guest House or something like that. And I'm not sure why, but they didn't really seem to speak to anybody in that area. But the shopkeeper had said that they were on the right track, like maybe it was just a really long journey. So the next day they set off to Shangri-La, and it probably was a really long journey because they took the bus at 8:30 a.m. and they arrived in Shangri-La at about 1 p.m. and they immediately just started walking around up there, visiting all the places that David could have been. His father, Roy, said that he had the feeling that he might have gone to a barber's, like to get his hair cut or something. I'm not sure if that's just because it would have like made the birthmark on his head would have been like a really prominent thing, but his dad felt that they should check there, which they did. They looked in like all the barbers, like shops, guest houses. It didn't really mention that they checked in restaurants, but I would assume that they did. Why wouldn't you? If you're looking in barbers and not restaurants, I feel like you're kind of doing something wrong. But his family knowing better than I do, obviously if that's where they felt that he was gonna go, they were probably, you know, doing the right thing by just following their instinct and trusting what they thought might have been the right thing to do. So they spent the whole day there just searching, looking in different shops, barbers, cafes, speaking to people, asking if they knew anything, and this went on until about 9 o'clock at night, and then they decided to just retire for the night, get some sleep and try again in the morning. So they found a place to stay for the night. They stayed at Milk River Guest House, and that was owned by a Tibetan family who were friends with Sean, their tour guide. Go Sean. So they spent the night there, got up early in the morning, and the family said their prayers and everything, and then they decided to just get on with it, just get back out and start off where they'd finished last night, just continue on from where they'd left it at 9 p.m. the previous night. So they had their breakfast and they got on the bus, the number 3 bus, which would take them to some like military installations, and I'm gonna butcher this name again, but they began walking up a nearby street which took them away from these installations, up a street called Tuanji. I'm sorry, like I said, I don't speak Chinese. My bad. So they went up Tuanji Street and this took them west, and along this street they checked all the guest houses, all the barbershops, still no sight of him. And I'm still a little bit baffled as to why they were asking barbershops seemingly over restaurants. I guess it's to do with like the birthmark on his head and the fact that he spoke fluent Mandarin and was white. Like they would definitely remember him there, but I don't know, I'm just gonna trust the process, I guess. Anyways, there was a Korean cafe on this street, and before they'd got there a little while back, somebody had recommended that they try and ask in there. They said like, this is a really popular place, obviously if you know he speaks Korean, try there. So they went into this cafe and they met the owner who spoke Korean and one of her employees who remembered a guy who fit David's description. So they kind of just talked with them for a little while. She said that he spoke Korean and Chinese both like really well, and that he visited the cafe like a couple of times, like maybe 2 or 3 times over like 3 days. She wasn't entirely sure at this point, and when she saw the placards that were on their front, she was like, I think that was the guy. He's like got a striking resemblance to the boy that I remember seeing. It could have been him. So they were definitely onto something here. I mean, how many people can you say go up to this area in China who are American, a white man who looks exactly like David, or at least has a resemblance to him, speaks Korean and Chinese very well? You know, it's more than likely, like, most definitely him, right? So she remembered seeing him. She said that there was this woman that he was traveling with, this tall Chinese woman. She said that he joked around with the employees and everything. She said that he basically, she said that he was too knowledgeable though to have just gotten lost or to have just become, you know, stranded up there. She said that the way he spoke Chinese and Korean was like just in such a manner that she knew that he was capable of taking care of himself, if you know what I mean, from getting from place to place and communicating what he was meaning very well. Yeah, he could joke around with her employees in different languages, you know. He was a smart guy. And some reports say that he went to a different cafe, which is the one next door. I'm not entirely sure on this because apparently that one was Korean as well. It may have just been that this was like a Korean area with like Korean restaurants. He was staying there for a couple of days and he was kind of alternating his meals between the 2 days, right? Breakfast, lunch, dinner. If both of them said they saw him like 3 times over the course of 2 days, surely that means he went for like 2 meals in one cafe and 1 in the other, like alternate days. Does that make sense? That could have been what happened actually. I'm not really sure. So they went to this other cafe and the owner there thought she might recognize him, and they showed her the pictures that they had, and she was like, oh yeah, that was him, he was here. So at this point David was clearly no longer anywhere near the gorge to have fallen and died. He'd been seen up here, and this was his last confirmed sighting in Shangri-La. And his family believed that he spent one day travelling through the gorge on his way to Shangri-La, stopped off in Hava, where the shopkeeper went up to where the shopkeeper saw him, kind of maybe spent the night there, and he probably went to Shangri-La and arrived there on August 12th with the intentions of leaving the following day. So it is kind of theorized by his family that David would have left on the evening of the 13th to take a 2.5-hour bus ride back to Jiaotou to get his backpack, or however you pronounce it, I'm sorry, to get his backpack in order to fly from Kunming to Seoul on the 15th, like the morning of the 15th. So his family were basically like set on not believing what the Chinese government were telling them about David having fallen into the river. They also at one point said he might have been bandits got him. It seems like they were just kind of changing the story to fit their own narrative or whatever, cover up. But his family also didn't believe the theory that he had just gone off the radar of his own accord. The Chinese officials said that he might have just gone into hiding, and his family were like, no. He told us he was looking forward to coming back and telling us all about his trip. He's got big plans for his life, and no money had been taken out of his account. It hadn't been touched. He hadn't taken much money with him anyway on the hike, but his account hadn't been touched, so he hadn't taken any more out. In fact, his account hadn't been touched at all since August the 5th. And this was like a month later. And it would also be so out of character for him to just forfeit his last year of university like that. He has worked so hard to get where he wants to be, and to just throw it away like that would just be completely out of character for him. And in the reports, his family also made a little quote, which I'm going to read to you now. They said, "We do not believe that David is staying with a Chinese woman somewhere in China, as his religious training and missionary service for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints would preclude this type of behaviour." And this wasn't really a theory that he had run off with a woman, but I think it was just to kind of suggest that he wasn't the type of person who would run off because he's had like a religion forced upon him. He chose to follow this religion, like his family followed it, yeah, but he chose to follow it. He chose to go to the religious university that he did. And I feel like he wasn't rebelling against anything. He didn't have any reason to just run off with someone. And I think sometimes you see people who are in like really strict religions and then they go missing and you think, oh, it's their way of escaping. But I think it's basically just his parents' way of saying that he wouldn't do anything against his religion. He is religious. He wouldn't go off with a woman. And I trust that 100% because, like I said earlier, the way people make friends on these trails, they just kind of like meet up, they talk for a while, they go eat together. They might share like a taxi or a car somewhere, and then they just go their separate ways and just do their own thing and then meet somebody else. I think it is just kind of one of those situations. I think all his parents were really trying to say there is that this woman that he was seen with wouldn't have been any cause for concern over his disappearance. They knew him so well that we can kind of trust what they were saying, right? I mean, they were so close. Just before his disappearance, he had told his family that he was excited to come back and, you know, tell them all about his trip, that he was excited to finish his degree, get a good job, meet a nice woman, you know, get married. He was really excited for his life, and so running off like that just doesn't make sense. And his family do have every reason to believe that he is still alive and well, and we're gonna get a little bit further into that. A little bit further. Oh, but first I'm just going to tell you about a little interview that they had with the owner of the cafe, because they gave her some time to kind of clear her mind, get her thoughts together about him. They were like, let us know if you remember, and she did. She was called Zhang Xiaofen, and she was working in the cafe called the Yak Bar. And again, she confirmed that he had visited her 3 times over the course of 2 days. She looked over the photos that his family had with them and said, that is definitely David, you know, that's the guy who came here. She also said that he spoke with her in Korean when he visited, that he ordered cheap, or as she nicely put it, simple meals, and she said that he sat in the same chair at the same table on all 3 of his visits. She said that on the second day, he went to the restaurant with an Asian woman who was tall and attractive. Ooh. But she said that the woman didn't speak either Korean or Chinese, and so she was probably an American tourist because she only spoke English. She was probably like an Asian American tourist, and that she just needed somebody to help her order food or something. And Ms. Feng said that she kind of smiled as she told his family that he was like teasing this woman in Korean because she couldn't understand. And I mean, if somebody did that to me, I would just say they're an arse. But I mean, I guess it's all in good humor, right? They were obviously having a nice time, and you might be thinking like, oh, a little bit flirty. No, she said, in fact, actually, Roy, David's dad, actually asked her, like, do you think he had any romantic interest in this woman that would, you know, maybe cause him to want to disappear? And she was like, no, from what I could see, there was no romantic interest at all. She said, in fact, I don't even think they were traveling together. It seemed like they had just met up, and because she couldn't speak either Korean or Chinese, she was struggling to order food. She was struggling to like feed herself while she was there. And so they'd met, and he basically offered to take her to a cafe and help her get some food. She said that they both paid for their meals separately. David paid for his, the woman paid for hers, and that was basically it. Somebody who only speaks English, even if there was a romantic interest, I think she would be a bad idea of a person to run off with in the middle of China. Like, would you not want to run off with somebody who is Chinese? Just a thought. Just thought they might be a bit more useful. And the third and final time that David left the cafe, she said that he said goodbye to her in a way which was kind of like, goodbye, thank you for, you know, taking care of me whilst I've been here. It was kind of like I'm moving on to another place now. I'm going on, like I won't be back again kind of goodbye. Not like, oh, thanks for the meal, see you later. You know, it was a bit more, I don't know how to say it. It probably was like the wording that he used in Chinese. Obviously, we don't really have that in English. But she said that she couldn't remember if he said where he was planning on heading, which is not very helpful, Miss Feng. But, I mean, we won't hold it against her, eh? I mean, that was the last anybody ever saw of him, but whatever. It's not her fault, it was a whole month ago. And whilst David's family were still in that area, kind of looking around for other people who might have seen him, they did encounter a couple more people who came up to them and said, hey, we think we might have seen your son. One of them was a guide who was from the Snowland Resort and Cafe called Dorje. Dorje and Sanji were like the owners. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name. I don't even know where that name is from. But Dorje and Sanji were from, they owned the Snowland Resort and Cafe. And they ran like a charity house type of thing. And Dorje checked with David's family with like the pictures and everything. And he looked and he was like, oh yeah, that's him. And his family asked like, oh, how do you remember him? And Dorje basically said, oh, I had a couple of conversations with him over the course of 2 days. And his family said, do you remember like what days these were specifically? Like, I know you're saying it's about 4 weeks ago, but like what days like in particular? And he said maybe somewhere around the 14th and 15th of August. Now, those were probably not the days he was supposed to be there. Obviously, like I said, he had a flight to catch on the 15th. But even if it was just like a day or two before that, it still fits with the timeline, right? It's not like he was saying, oh, the 2nd or the 23rd, because he wouldn't have been there then. Dorje also mentioned that David spoke Chinese really well and that he asked about the treks that he offered. He was another little tour guide who did like little guided tours, and he gave him some information on that, but ultimately David decided not to take any of the tours because he didn't have enough money for it. He just couldn't afford to spend that kind of money safely. He needed it for food and such. Another person who saw him was Liu Mao, who worked for the Dongqing Tibetan Area International Guest House. Gosh, that is a mouthful. Which wasn't at all far from the Snowland Resort where the other people had seen him. And Liu Mao said this guy was here. He stayed for a night somewhere around the middle of August. So his family showed her the pictures and she said, yep, that was definitely him. That is the guy that stayed here. He spoke Chinese perfectly. Like, he was so good at Chinese. It's definitely him. I recognize him from when he came. And then she told them, right, this blew my mind. She said to them, I don't have any records of him staying here because Chinese officials, like, they came round and they took all the records from all of the guest houses of any international visitors, which explains why there were no records of him being seen at Tina's, when we know for a fact that he did stay there. You tell me why they did that. I will wait. You tell me why they decided to do that, because I do not have a clue why they would just be like, oh, let's just take all of this evidence and not do anything with it. Are you telling me they're not covering up for something now? And she was also able to tell the family, like, oh, she was super helpful. We love this woman. She was also able to tell them that he was planning on returning to Lijiang, that kind of area. So he was planning on going back from Shangri-La, where he was, back down towards where he had been before. So there is overwhelming evidence to suggest that David definitely made it to Shangri-La sometime on like either the 11th or 12th of August, and that he was planning on returning to Lijiang through Zhaotao on the 13th of August-ish, roughly 13th, 14th. And there is no evidence to suggest that he planned on trying to enter like Tibet or explore any other kind of area. All his family kind of were able to make of it is that he had gone there and he was going to come back. And everybody that his family met as well, they were just sort of saying that he didn't have a lot of money. He was kind of being a bit frugal because he didn't take a lot with him on this little hike. So it's very doubtful that he would have gone any further because he just didn't have the funds in which to do so. Now, Shangri-La to Zhaotao is almost an entire day's journey. So in order for him to get back by the 14th so that he can get his flight on the 15th, he would need to leave like at the end of the 13th at the very latest. Because he had to get to Zhaotao to collect his bag. Remember, he left his big backpack at the guest house there. And he would need to collect that and then go to Kunming to take his flight. From Shangri-La to Zhaotao is like 2.5 to 3 hours, so that part wouldn't take all day. But Zhaotao to Kunming is like 10 hours, so he would need that time beforehand to like get some rest, collect his bag, and then travel to Kunming in order to make his flight. Now, we're going to start talking a little bit about North Korea. Just bear with, okay? It'll all make sense, because that, as you can see by the title of the video, is the theory that he is currently in North Korea. Now, David was in Yunnan province, and he didn't know at the time that Yunnan is one of the biggest areas for North Koreans to, when they escape from North Korea, they come down like across this part of the country and through Yunnan. I don't know why I'm doing all this as I explain. Bear with me. I'm very handsy. I talk a lot with my hands. Anyways, the North Koreans go down through Yunnan. David wasn't hugely familiar with this, but it's kind of integral to our story. So just follow, okay? And for anybody who doesn't really know about North Korean refugees and why they can't just go straight to South Korea, is that the North-South Korea border is so heavily guarded that they just cannot get past. They will die, okay? They will be shot, essentially. So there is routes out, like it's slightly less guarded near China. It's still guarded, but it's slightly easier for them to get out that way. So they get out, in fact it's quite a lot easier, because that's the way they get out, duh. But they get out through China. They come all the way down like the edge of China through Yunnan mostly. There's a couple of other routes, but this is the way that a lot of them go. And then they get to the ports, and these ports will take them to their next destination. They will either go to South Korea, or they might go to the United Kingdom, they might go to America as refugees. And so obviously they have to go through China first. And the year prior to this, it was something like 468 individuals who had escaped North Korea. And that is a pretty big number, like in just 1 year. So it's a bit of a situation at this point in time. And so there is quite a lot of North Korean defectors moving through China at this point, supposedly. We can't confirm or deny, but it's a big thing. So people are kind of on the lookout for it. Particularly like North Korea and the Chinese government to an extent. And David didn't realise that Shangri-La is the part where they all basically pass through in Yunnan. Like Yunnan province, and Shangri-La is like this little town. That's the part that they go through. I guess probably because there's like restaurants where they speak Korean and stuff there, so maybe that's why. Hopefully by this point you've kind of caught on to what I'm getting at. You know, It's like he speaks excellent Chinese, he speaks excellent Korean, like he's fluent in both these languages, he's American. This is the area that all the refugees pass through. What is he doing there? He looks a little bit out of place and a little bit suspicious, okay? So it's said, and there's no real evidence for this. I mean, I'm going to get into a little bit later on how the Chinese government kind of, well, how it's presumed that they interviewed him, because you'd be like, why would they take him in for questioning? But this is kind of about what happened in the question, but I'll say that a bit later, if that makes sense. Whatever, anyways. So the Chinese officials, they find David, they take him in for questioning, and they basically ask him, are you helping North Korean individuals escape from North Korea? And David's just like, no. And they're like, well, you speak great Korean, you speak great Chinese, how do you speak Korean so well? And he was like, obviously he learned Korean when he was a missionary in Korea, but it's illegal to do that in China, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen on the news recently, I think the BBC did a little bit of an expose on them recently. These re-education camps, these concentration camps, whatever you want to call them, basically a lot, at the minute, it's mostly Muslims. A lot of them are currently being held there, detained against their will. And that's a whole other subject, and I'll probably cover it briefly in a couple of my videos. But China are very anti-religion, and so for him to be like, I was a missionary, but I'm not doing that here, like, it makes him look even slightly more suspicious. Like, this guy's circumstances just don't fit well with this storyline. You can just see how they were like, what the hell are you doing here, you know? So all you really need to know is that teaching religion is highly illegal in China, and unfortunately, because they can't prove that he was doing that, well, not unfortunately, fortunately, unfortunately, I don't really know. Maybe it would have been more fortunate for them to have arrested him, because at least we would know where he is, right? Anyways, they couldn't press charges, they couldn't find any evidence, they couldn't press charges, so he was released. Okay, that's my theory out of the way. Not my theory, but a theory out of the way. We're going to move back to where his family were in Shangri-La in 2004. That was the last they'd seen of him, okay? As far as his family know, that's it. Shangri-La, he disappeared. Now, David's family, right, a couple years later, in like 2006, they get a phone call from this guy. I think at that time it was Chuck Downs. I'm not certain it was him, but the guy was the head of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, which is an American committee. And he basically just says to them, I think your son was taken to North Korea. What? And so his family are kind of like, okay, we had the feeling that he wasn't dead and that he was just missing. But like, what gives you this theory? What is making you think that? Like, what? And so they talk a little bit, and they realise that a lot of things line up about where David was at the time of his disappearance and the path that the North Korean defectors take through China. Now, there was this guy who, I'm not going to talk too much about him because I'll probably do a video on him in the future. I would like to, at least. His name was Charles Jenkins. He wasn't kidnapped or anything. He just defected into North Korea. He was an American national who chose to live in North Korea of his own accord during the war, and he had actually been released by the North Korean government from the country in 2004. And he had been released just about a month before, or just like a couple of weeks before, something like that, before David went missing. And Charles Jenkins has been a very high-ranking translator for North Korean officials. And the only other American who was in Korea at that time was Joseph Dresnok, and he was old as well. He, like Charles, had entered Korea at the time of the war. I might do a video on him as well, I might not. And he was at this point in failing health. So the government obviously had like a position open for a new translator. They needed a native English speaker, and nobody in North Korea can do that. Nobody's a native English speaker, and also not many people outside of North Korea would want to do that. So that timeline also adds up. And to add to this, David spoke a commonly used dialect of American English called Standard Midwestern, which is apparently the most common one in America. I didn't know this. I only just found this out whilst researching this case, but whatever. And so that's the dialect that if you're having translated, you would want them to have, right? Like, you'd be like, oh, he's got like the best accent, the most common accent. We'll have him. So his family hear this and they think, well, that kind of makes sense. Like, the timeline fits up and everything. Now you're probably thinking, well, how do you know he's there? How do you know this guy's not just making this stuff up? Like, nobody's seen him. Oh, but they have. They have, because in 2011, a whole another set of years later, it comes out that these Japanese people, there's a lot of Japanese living in North Korea, and basically they still have some kind of connection with Japan. So a lot of information from within North Korea gets out via Japan. And the Japanese people within North Korea were saying, oh, there's this American guy here, he's working as a translator for Kim Jong-un. He's been here since 2004, he speaks Chinese, he speaks Korean, he speaks English. He's fantastic. I mean, as a translator, him speaking Chinese as well, like, that's like 2 jobs in one, you know? Korean English, Korean Chinese, fantastic. Like, Kim Jong-un would have been super happy to have found him, I bet. And they're like, who is this guy? He's been here from 2004 and he speaks these languages. We don't know who he is. Do you all know he's here? Like, how did he get here? And they are also able to say that he is married to a North Korean woman and has 2 children. So, our little David, he might have kids now. I say little David like he's still 24. This was like 17 years ago. Yes, he will have children. He's a fully grown adult man. But it's nice to think that, honestly. It's nice to think that he has like his own little happy family over there, if he is still alive, and that he's not just miserable, you know, because he's been held there against his will. It makes me happy to think he has kids. And you might be thinking, well, maybe they just heard about him on the news. No, don't forget, North Korea only has their own news system. These people in Japan are not going to be able to find out really. Like, they don't have huge resources to be able to get outside information. And David's case was not talked about enough in the news in America at all. Like, his case should have been way more high profile, I feel, because, I mean, Trump and Kim Jong-un met just a couple of years ago. Like, he could have just asked him. Like, if this case had have been, like, a super big one, if it had had more coverage, he could have just been like, straight up, yo, who is he there? Is he in North Korea? Because we think he's missing, but if you got him, like, just tell us. And they could have covered it up for themselves. They could have been like, oh yeah, he chose to come over or whatever, like, without making themselves look bad. They weren't gonna be like, yeah, we kidnapped him. But, you know, a confirmation of whether he's still alive or not would just be nice. But the issue with these Japanese people having seen him is there's just simply no evidence. And so you're thinking, okay, yeah, I'm following this. It sounds like he could potentially be in there. It's making a little bit of sense, but how could he have got there? Well, with all this information that's come out of Japan, basically in 2012, David's family were invited to Tokyo to participate in the Great National Assembly on Abduction. And so when they were there, James, his brother, who speaks perfect Japanese, God bless you, James. God bless you. And he did a little speech and he basically asked for Japan to strengthen their Japan-US cooperation, to try and get more information on this subject, to try and, you know, intensify their research and their investigation into David's disappearance. Now, there's 2 organisations I have to mention here. The first is the National Association for the Rescue of Japanese Kidnapped by North Korea, or NARKN. Narkin. And I got some of this info from their website. Despite David not being Japanese, there is a page on their website entirely dedicated to him and his disappearance. And the other organisation is called the Association of Families of Victims Kidnapped by North Korea, or AFVKN. And AFVA is also mentioned on this website, but I couldn't actually find what that stands for. I would assume it's something similar and that stands for like the Association of Families of Victims Abducted, but I'm not entirely sure. So if you know what that stands for, please do let me know, so that I can pin the comment and just tell everybody what it actually is. But I need to mention them anyway because they as well as NARKN, and a parliamentary group on this issue, they all went to Washington to try and bring forward more like new information on David's case, so that the US would kind of make more of an effort to like reopen the case, look into it a bit more again, and just kind of get things moving in hopes that they can find David and confirm that he's alive. Now, about how he got from China to North Korea. You know the little theory thing that I was talking about, the interview and everything earlier? Well, that didn't just come from nowhere. There is a smidgen of evidence to support this. I told you that I would explain it. I'm just trying to keep things in a somewhat chronological order because I struggle to explain things otherwise. I struggle to explain things anyway. Why am I even making this video? Now, the website just says recently, but there's no saying when it was posted, so I don't really know when recently is. But the website says that the AFVA recently received important information from Chinese sources. And it says on the website that that for safety reasons, these sources shall not be disclosed. So, just in case I get kidnapped or anything, I better not even joke about that. And these sources, I'm just going to quickly read them to you now because I don't want to get anything wrong. These sources allegedly said that in August 2004, an American student at a university in Kunming, in the capital of Yunnan, was arrested by the National Security Bureau for helping an illegal alien, which kind of just means like an illegal foreigner, like somebody who's not meant to be there, so like North Korean, and that this student was 23 or 24 years old and that he was released in September. Subsequently, he was arrested by a group of 5 officers belonging to the Department of State Security of North Korea who had come to Kunming to monitor renegade North Korean citizens who were there. Now, there is a lot of similarities here. Both events happened in 2004. Both events happened in Yunnan province. David was American. David was also 24. Like the record said 23 or 24. He was 24. David was also a student. Now, some things are kind of off. Obviously, he wasn't studying in Kunming. He was just going there for his flight. But it seems like everything else just kind of adds up. Like maybe that was like an issue with translation or something. It could be. It could be very easily him just going like, oh, I'm a student, and they assuming that because he's in Kunming, like near the university or whatever, or because he's in Yunnan even, that they assume that he goes to that he's been to that university. It is confusing, but a lot of other things really do add up there. Now, I've got a little twist for you. Remember that friend that I told you about that David was traveling with? Now, way back when I started this story, I told you that David was like traveling with a friend for a little bit who he had met when he was a missionary in South Korea. And I refused at that point, oh so savagely, to tell you what he was doing in China. Well, now I'm going to tell you what he was there for. David's friend had been at Yanbian University of Science and Technology in Yanji around the time that David was in Beijing. And he had gone there with a small grant from Duke University to study North Korean minorities living near the border. And he had been studying North Korean refugees exiting into China there. The issues with that. And whilst he was there, he had requested a visa to enter the DPRK, or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. North Korea, as you and me know it. And the PRC, People's Republic of China, had denied it, and they had asked him to leave China. And this is the part between when he was leaving China and him being told to leave China. He had like 5 days where he was like trying to arrange transport out and everything. He was like, okay, well, I'll leave in 5 days. I've got 5 days. And he spent those 5 days with David in Beijing. Now, had all this not happened, you would have thought at that time it would have been completely harmless. I feel like personally it could have potentially been a case of mistaken identity. There is no theories on that, that David, you know, might have been, you know, that the government thought that David might have been his friend. Do you know what I mean? But I feel like maybe they were like, okay, we have no records of this guy leaving the country. Could it be him? You don't know. It also didn't say whether David took any formal identification with him on this hike that he went on And if not, when they arrested him, they could have been like, this is our guy, he's lying about his name. There's no saying what happened because we weren't there. Nobody was. Well, people were, but nobody that's gonna come out and be like, I know where he is. I know what happened to him. But even if not, man, like, even just the association may have made him incredibly suspect. You just don't know. Like, you just don't know. You simply cannot say. But his family do believe that this kind of association, along with the fact that he spoke Korean and Chinese so well, kind of made him look very suspicious, and as though he was in fact there to help North Koreans escape through China, which he wasn't. He was just trying to study. But I mean, there's only so much that you can say that. Like, how do people know if you're telling the truth or not? Of course you're not going to admit to it. And also, this is going to sound a little bit random, but just hear me out, okay? The way he disappeared fits very well with the way that North Koreans are known for kidnapping people. He disappeared completely without a trace, and his family have not heard from him since, which suggests that his kidnapping was done by trained professionals. Other patterns similar to what we have seen in cases in which we know what happened in the disappearance are extremely similar to what is suspected to have happened with David. So operations are known to have been carried out in and around restaurants. In 1977, North Korean officials lured Yu Takakume to a restaurant and kidnapped him there. In 1980, Tadaki Hara was kidnapped from a noodle shop, and he was held so that the North Korean officials could use his identification papers. In 1984, Megumi Yao was kidnapped and sent to Japan in order to increase North Korean intelligence nearby a US and JSDF base, or Japan Self-Defense Forces. A pastor called Kim Dong-shik was also lured into a restaurant in China and was kidnapped by North Korean officials there. I think some of these people I might end up doing a video on. I'm not entirely sure, but I think some of them are on my list, so just stick around, look out for them. Subscribe if you want. I forget that I'm making a YouTube video, I get that into this. And a lot of these abductions or disappearances are actually carried out in August, and that seemed kind of like a calling card, because it's done around Independence Day in North Korea. It's like a gift to the leader for Independence Day. It's very weird. And let me tell you, you will not believe this. The day that David would have disappeared officially is the day before Independence Day in North Korea. Like, there are so many coincidences here that I feel like they cannot simply just be coincidences, you know? And in case that wasn't even enough, just before David's disappearance, North Korea had already threatened action against Americans who tried to rescue North Korean defectors. On the 21st of July in the same year, the United States House of Representatives had just passed the North Korean Human Rights Act, and that condemned North Korea for its human rights violations. It set up new procedures for assisting North Korean refugees, and it set up an office headed by a presidential envoy with rank of ambassador in order to address North Korean human rights issues. And the North Korean Central News Agency, or, you know, the place where the propaganda is all churned out, they came back and they were like complaining about how it was going to destroy like the societal norms in North Korea and stuff. And they also threatened the US, which is just great. And all of this information together suggests very strongly that he is in North Korea at the moment. And it also suggests that the Chinese secret police, through the National Security Office, may potentially have had something to do with this disappearance, which is why they tried running with the theory that he just fell and slipped and died in the first place. Okay, so remember I said the AFVA and the NARKN sent those people, they went over to Washington in order to get the conversation about the disappearance going again in 2012, and to hopefully get the case reopened. It was never really closed, but to get it to be looked into again. And the State Department of the United States and the House of Representatives had some influential people who posed a question to Mr. Lee Hong, who was at the time the deputy spokesman for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this was just like at the regular press conference, and he was all like, oh, even though like the National Bureau of Investigation did all they could, David could not be found. Essentially, like, obviously I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what China came up with. They were just like, blah blah blah, you know, like they have been throughout this whole case, just like, we don't know what happened, sorry. But it's like 8 years on and they're still giving that fake, like, we tried. I mean, I can't really say it's fake because they might have tried, but I don't really have much faith that they did. I do personally believe that it was a bit of a cover-up. And 4 or 5 days later, the North Korean government spoke out in the Korean Central News Agency, and they basically said, we have absolutely no involvement in the case, and that was that. That's all they said on the matter, basically. And 4 days later at that. Now, there is a lot about the different ways that you can help, and I will link the source and I will make sure you know which one it is in the descriptions box below, in case there is anything in that you are able to do in order to help try and find David, ensure that he's okay, and potentially even bring him back home. And his family have never given up hope that he might one day be able to return home. Obviously, people like Charles Jenkins, who lived there previously, he was freed, but I personally feel like it's not going to be as likely with David. Charles was married to a Japanese woman in North Korea, and they moved out and moved to Japan. But I feel with him being married to a North Korean and with his children being North Korean, as from obviously what's been heard from the Japanese people there, I feel like he's much less likely to be released, which is very sad, but all that we can do at this moment in time is hope, and just hope that he is okay, really. I genuinely think that even just the confirmation that he is alive and doing well would be so beneficial to his family. That is something they would very much want and need, and if there is any way that you can help that is outlined in these articles that I've linked below, please do so. It would mean the world to his family, I know it would. They still haven't given up hope that he is out there. And so that's the end of my first case. I really hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative and useful, and please do let me know down in the comments what you think happened to David, whether he was kidnapped by North Koreans or if he died in China. If you have any further questions, please let me know what they are in the comments section down below, and I will do my best to answer them. Subscribe and be sure to come back next week when we will be discussing the case of the freezer babies, which is a very morbid one. So maybe you won't want to come back for that. Actually, it discusses infanticide, and I know that is a very touchy subject for a lot of people. But if you want to subscribe, skip next week and come back for some more later, then you're very much welcome to do that as well. But until I see you again, take care, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye!